The next thing I just want to talk about is the actual raw editor within Photoshop. Now, there's a couple of ways you can access the raw editor. So what we'll do, we'll just we'll go open. Now we'll just navigate to the cog. Now this is an actual raw file that I shot, via camera. So it's a Nikon D70, old camera, but it's a raw file. So if you just double click on it, what it's going to do is it opens it up. This is the raw editor window. So by default, if you have a raw file, it opens it up automatically within this raw editor. Now, just a little trick which I'll show you. If you don't actually have a raw file, but you still want to access the raw editor window, which you will want to because it's a very powerful window, what you can actually do is you go open as. Now we'll just navigate. So the white building is a TIFF file. So I'll click on that, but under here, you would go to camera raw. And then if you click open, what that does is it opens a TIFF file within the actual raw editor window as well. So again, that's a, it's a little kind of cheap, little workaround, but that way you can access the raw window, even if you don't have a raw file to work with. When you're doing photography, though, always shoot in raw, if you just make that rule number one. Now with the raw editor window, the most important information is actually here. So if you just click on this little thing, this just shows you your workspace, your depth. So again, you can, crank it to 16 bits. It's always better working, the highest that you can, because you can always downgrade it later. And then you've got your size here. So this is a default, it's 6 megapixels, but if you want, you can crank it right up to, that's just what my camera was, capable of taking, for example. So this is the raw information of the actual photo. So always, when I work, just as I said, always go big, and you can always downgrade it later, you know what I mean? So that's the true power within the raw editor, is that you've got, all access to all these different resolutions, within the file. So you've got, quite a lot of information that you can actually work with. So your resolution's 240, that's standard for printing. You can, 300 never hurts. I mean, I say go big, why not? But again, 240 standard. So, 300, 240 doesn't really matter. But so that's probably the most important part of the raw editor, is just that you've got all this information that you can now work with. So if we OK, our resolution is now 6144 by 4085. Now, so this is the actual raw editor. So you'll notice, a lot of these sliders are quite similar to the ones that I showed you within the image tab. But the main power, you've got access to your exposure now. So this is the actual exposure within the image file. So, if you can bring the exposure back down to sort of, recover that information. Like, if you sort of shot it, say if your image was shot a bit overexposed, you can recover all that info. That's the real power of the raw editor. And when it comes to auto bracketing for HDR processing, I'll explain how that works too. So with HDR processing, when you want to actually use that as a process, when you shoot your photo, you use a function on your camera called auto bracketing. And what that does is it sets your camera up to take 3 photos. So you'd have it on a tripod for whatever shot that you want. And what you would do is once you've sort of set it up to auto bracketing, it would take a photo at a correct exposure, which you've set it to. Then it will take one -2 on the exposure on the f-stop, and then it'll take one +2. So basically it'll give you, for the sake of example, like let's just say we auto bracketed this photo. So that would be your standard one. Then your auto bracket would be a +2, which would be there, and then a -2. So what that does is when you go to actually process it in Photomatics, it gives it additional information to work with. So it actually merges all that info. So, a standard, you've only got so much information, on your standard shot here. But if you merge it with the darker information, it's going to draw, all the color information from the dark areas, and it's also going to draw the color information from the light areas. So that's how auto bracketing works. You just have to check your camera, manual, and you can set the amount too, so you can just do it to -1 and what have you. But what we can actually do within the raw editor, you can do a fake basically auto bracket if you didn't shoot like that. So so we leave it at this, your standard exposure, and then you'd open your image, and that would just give you your standard one. Then we would save one at -2, open that image again, save it, and then do the same for +2. So that's how you could do basically a fake auto bracket, but all the information's still there. So we'll get to that later on. I'll show you that process, but for the time being, that's just how the theory behind the auto bracketing works. So anyway, we've got the exposure, so we'll just do it like that for now. And as I said, you've got access to your contrast, so again, it's pretty, contrast is nice, but it's, as I said, it's easy to overdo it, you know what I mean? So, and again, you got your highlights, so you can boost a bit of the highlight information, shadows, you can bring them, it's got quite nice shadow information, so you can bring them down. You've got access to your whites, so you can boost the whites, you can really crush them. If you want to go stylized, as I said, there's no right or wrong way, it's all, personal kind of perception, it's all subjective. So and then your blacks, you can really crush the blacks too. Like mucking around with the whites and blacks is pretty much the same as your contrast here. So as I said, we'll chill it out, we won't go too overboard. Now you've got your clarity, which is very powerful function. So this really, it really draws out the info. So if you go the other way, see how everything kind of flattens, but then if you bring it up, it really draws out the texture, the cracks in the wall and that sort of thing. So that's clarity is a really nice function to kind of work around with. So you got your vibrance, which is obviously sort of your intensity of the color, and the saturation too. So again, let's do what you want, but just be careful with these little guys here, don't want to go too overboard. And then you've got your temperature. So basically, this is sort of, you can cool, basically you move it to the blue area and it cools it right down, you can get a real kind of, cooler shot, and then you can add a lot more warmth to it going the other way. And you can also tint the actual image itself too, so you can, sort of give it a bit more of a magenta type, hue. So, that's, two little functions there. So that's the first part of the raw editor. Now we've also got access to curves. So this is literally the same as the curves in the standard window. So you could muck around with your highlights. Again, like subtle sort of stuff, darks, and you've also got access to your shadows in this one. So as you can see, like on that bottom window, for example, that really darkens them out. So that's quite a nice little function. Now I've got sharpening as well. So this one's very, very useful. It's a bit more of a subtle kind of effect. So if we get a bit of a zoom going on, so if you sharpen the amount, it can just bring it out. It's subtle, but so if you see nothing, then it really sharpens it. So it's easy to overdo sharpening too, and if you go too far, it tends to look a little bit artificial. So you can just bring a little bit of sharpening into it. So when you with the just within the raw editor, when you if you zoom, you can keep zooming, then you can right click and you can fit in the view, and that brings it back to its a workable sort of size. And again, so the radius is just the overall amount that it sharpens. And you've also got your detail too, so that can bring out very sort of minor details within the image. It's a it's a subtle effect, but if you see sort of like along the top here, so see how it sort of softens it, and then you can sharpen it. But it does tend to introduce sort of a bit of artificial noise within the image. So you just got to be careful with how much you want to do it. You can just a little bit. I sort of work in like sort of like I approach it from like 10% kind of thing. You're like, you just boost that about 10%, 5%, and that way culminatively your image at the end will look really nice, because it's quite easy when you start out just to boost everything 100%, and then it just builds up and builds up, and it looks a bit kind of amateurish. Which you're starting out, and that's fine. You got to make those mistakes and that, but that's just something just to be aware of. Just like the subtle adjustments always work really nicely. And you've also got the noise reduction. So within the luminance, which just refers to the actual color, the brightness. So if you have a look through here, so see how we've got like a bit of noise going on here, a bit of artifacts. So if we if we increase the luminance, you can see that actually smoothens out that sort of artificial effect within, that occurs from increasing the sharpening and the detail. So the luminance is definitely something to, work with. And again, it's a subtle effect, but, it gives it that nice sort of, sharpness to it without introducing too much noise. So that's the detail panel. So, this is, quite powerful. It's a subtle effect, but it's, very useful. Now you've got your next window here, which is your Hsl and Gray Scale. So hue, saturation, luminance. So you can convert it to grayscale, make it black and white, or not. Now this is just pushing basically all your different color values within each particular component. So within the saturation, we could say, because the windows have got a bit of aqua and blue in it, so we could really, push those forward a bit and saturate it. So as you can see, sort of in this plane here, see how it sort of boosts, brings out the blue within the windows. So that's so you can isolate certain colors within the image by using these particular windows. So it's just selective saturation basically. It depends how much. We can go a little bit. Why not? Again, there's a little bit of. There's a bit of yellow. You could. Yeah, no, I don't want to do that. So you can cool it right off too. So because as you see, there's a lot of yellow information, within the pipes and this particular part. So if we wanted to sort of we can sort of desaturate those particular parts, sort of, really cool them off kind of thing, if that's sort of the effect that you want to get. So again, that refers to the saturation, and then you've got your same functions for the luminance, which is basically your color, like your intensity of the brightness of those colors. So as you can see with the aquas, if you look at this particular part here, so it's going to bring out the highlights within those images here. It's most pronounced here, obviously. So as you can see, it's actually, because it looks a bit, when it's like toned right down, you get like this sort of weird, glow kind of thing going on with your image. So, boosting that a little bit kind of softens out that glow, which, looks quite nice. So again, that's your luminance effects. And then your hue, just, that just globally sort of changes the actual color of it. So instead of, the windows sort of become more of a deeper blue, I kind of like them more as an aqua tealish color. And again, it just depends what color information is actually contained within the photo. So because there's not really, you can move the magenta up and down, but there's no magenta present within the image, so that's not doing anything. So it just depends. You just got to look at your image and sort of figure out, okay, that looks nice, that works, that doesn't, etc. So that is the Hsl Grayscale component of the raw editor. Very powerful. Now you've got an interesting function, which is the split toning. So what this actually does is this changes the color of the highlights and the shadows within your image. So basically you can determine the hue of your highlights and then what they are saturated as. So again, it can be pretty funky depending on what you're actually going for. As I said, because there's a lot of highlight information within the whites. But again, so you could kind of, if you want to warm it up a little bit, you could use that effect. It's an interesting one. It's sort of a bit more stylized, and then you can do the shadows. So it just depends what exactly you're going for. It's I said you can really cool the image off. You can kind of you can make it a bit kind of greenish. It doesn't really work for this image, but that's and the balance is just the amount of each one. So that's an interesting function. Definitely worth experimenting with. You can get some interesting effects, and grain, which is kind of it just adds grain to it if you kind of wanted to do that, I guess. It's a more of a stylized choice. It kind of a bit counterintuitive, I kind of find. And finally, you've just got where's the vignette? Oh, okay, so there we go. So we've got the vignette too. So you can chuck a vignette around it as well if you so desire. You can change the midpoint of the vignette, roundness of the vignettes. I mean, they can be useful because it does sort of, like, in a subtle way, can kind of draw your attention to the middle part of the image. It just depends. Like, you can make. I don't tend to vignette a lot of things, but it's there if you need it. So that's the raw editor in a nutshell. So what we'll actually do though, so I'm reasonably happy with the way that looks. So what we'll do is we'll go open image, and so that's given us an opened image of what we've just edited. So what we'll do now is we'll just do a little fake auto bracketing. So what we'll do, we'll go open as white building, camera raw, and what you'll notice too is that all of your settings have actually been saved now. So that's across the board with every raw. So it's the same thing. Like once you apply, say if you're happy with the images, opening image is the same thing as doing done. So once you're done, it's done, and all your parameters have been saved. So in the interest of doing a fake little auto bracket, we will just crank this down to -3. I'll make that dark. Open that one, and open as camera raw, and we'll bring you way back up to yeah, right, we'll give it about that. Okay, so basically, this is what it would look like if you just done an auto bracket within your photo. So we've got 3 different informations now. So what we'll do is we will save as within our Photoshop course file. So we'll go white building 01. Now when you save, just make sure that none is selected for the image compression, and we are okay. Then we'll go white building 02, save as, white building 02, okay, and white building, save as, white building 03. Okay, so now we have 3 auto bracketed photos which we have achieved through the raw editor.